goes over their head to begin with, but maybe when they're a little older, they appreciate
Just
it.
stick that in your face a little bit.
Appreciate it a little more. So first of all, I'm 79 years old. So some of you out here might be approaching that age as well. And I've been married for 58 years. I married my childhood sweetheart. Met her in 9th grade at the roller skating rink, and then the rest of it's history. We have two children. One daughter that lives in Rochester here with 2 grandkids, and we got a son in Minneapolis that has two children as well. So we got 4 grandkids. We moved to Rochester in 1972, so we've lived here for 54 years. So I've got somewhat of an unusual background in that I'm the youngest of 3 sons. And my parents were Hilda and Gustav Schuller. And Hilda and Gustav, they lived in Romania. So they were Germans that migrated to Romania. During World War II, similar to what's happening exactly right now with Ukraine and Romania, the Russians moved into Romania. So my dad, because he was of German origin, he was drafted into the German army and actually became a guard in a French prison camp. And in this French prison camp, after the Americans came in, the guards actually became the prisoners. So my dad ended up becoming a prisoner in a French prison camp. My mother, who was in Romania, obviously at the time, while my dad was in the service, she had my oldest brother who was 4 years old at the time. So what happened, and she was pregnant with a second child. Russians moved in there, they took over the town, did whatever they wanted to. So those people that didn't want to live under communism ended up getting on a cattle train and they headed out of there. So a few of the older people just stayed there and they lived, under communism after that. But my mother was one of them that left along with some aunts. So so she was pregnant, so she had a boy that was born in Budapest in Hungary. And what happened then is it was not very sanitary. My mother became ill. So she ended up staying in Budapest for about a month. So my relatives took my brother, who was just born, and the 4-year-old to Austria. So at that time, Austria was neutral, and the Austrians were required to take people in, Czechoslovakians and Polish and what have you. So my mother and my 2 brothers ended up, on this farm. And then my dad must have been home for a while on leave because I was born then in this, at least to my knowledge, I was born in Tuffelsheim, which is on a farm. This farmer had a couple of houses there, and we lived in one of those farms. So we lived there. This was 1946 then, 1946. Shortly thereafter, the Austrian government was required, to place these people in camps, in DP camps. So they put us into a displaced persons camp a few miles north of there, northeast of Salzburg, if you will. And we lived in this army barracks then from 1946 until 1956. And I can still remember, a little kid, no indoor toilets. We had 3 rooms. Heating was with 1 stove, and both for cooking and heating, outdoor plumbing, and it was a rat-infested place. And I can still remember the stench from the fumigation that they did periodically. Anyway, that's where we lived in for almost 10 years. So then, I was going to say here, after, the war ended, my mother then, or my dad joined my mother then, and we lived in that refugee camp. The Red Cross actually had a program at that time where children from the refugee camps could live with a host family in another country. And I was one of those lucky kids. I was in first grade. I ended up going to Denmark, Ringkøbing, Denmark, on the west coast of Jutland, Denmark. And I lived with this family, Carl and Jacob Jacobsen, pardon me. So I went from this EP camp into a house that actually had running water, had my own bedroom, had food every day. They provided clothing for me, and they had a 20-year-old daughter, but they didn't have any sons. So I was kind of like their little kid. So I really had it made. And I thought to myself, you know what? I wouldn't mind living like this. But I unfortunately had to go back then to our camp. So then, and even there, somebody was always looking out for me. I always think that I'm one of those lucky people that Almighty has always looked out for me and blessed me. And this was a great Christian family. I could not speak Danish. They could not speak German. So it was interesting. I remember there was a hymn that I knew in German, and likewise they have in Danish. It was the first thing that we could communicate with. And then later on, within 2 months, I was fluent, in Danish. And then I corresponded with those people all through college. And then they passed away. And I was really fortunate. 2 years ago, we have a granddaughter that studied in Copenhagen. So I asked my family if they wanted to go to Copenhagen and visit where I stayed in Denmark. And this 20-year-old now was 90. So it was really a nice experience. So they got to meet her and all of that. So it was just a great experience. So now, how did we get to the United States? My father had 2 sisters and a cousin that had moved here earlier. So one of them moved to Texas. They didn't like Texas. But the second family moved to Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And the third family moved to Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And then we were the 4th family. So immigration requirements at that time were quite strict. First of all, we were one of the latter, the 4th family to move over here, partially because my dad was in the service. And, they checked him out. Was he in the SS? Did he have anything to do with the atrocities and all of that? So anyway, it took a little longer. And so finally in 1956, we were able to come over here. And quite interesting that the Lutheran Social Service lent my parents $5,000 to move over here. So my dad made we just put our belongings together, whatever we could, to move over here, and we ended up then moving here. We had, they charged 8% interest, but the thing that was required at that time, number one is you had to have a place to live. Number 2, you had to have a job. And number 3, you had to have a sponsor, and usually that was somebody that was affiliated with a church or whatever. So then that became our church. So those were the requirements. So we ended up in Sioux Falls with that. Moved in with my aunt and uncle for a few months, and then we ended up actually buying a basement house, no top on it. Then we finished that off, and so that's how we ended up in Sioux Falls. So I was in fourth grade there, and we moved here in February. Could not speak the language, so they put me in third grade. And you know, uh, I was ahead in math and science, so you know that was kind of an easy thing. But obviously, the language was a real, you know, difficult. And you know, as a small child, you want to fit in, like you know, with the rest of the group. And so, um, and this was, you have to remember, it was 10 years after the war, and there was still some animosity against the Germans, you know, and you know, so sometimes I was a Kraut, you know, instead of a German, but anyway, uh, but I learned, and I worked hard so I wouldn't have an accent. Had some really good teachers that kept me in at recess time and all that. And so as I've gotten older sometimes, and you know, if it was not my native language, sometimes I'll think of a German word before I do the English, which is really kind of interesting. Um, and then sometimes if I have a glass of wine or whatever, too much, where I don't think about it, I'll say, if I can't we vote, instead of why can't we vote? And I still have to really slow that down in order to get that. So anyway, I worked hard. You know what? It's interesting. In the English language, the Americans have trouble with the word ich, you know, and the Germans with the D's and the W's. And the other one that's really difficult, which is a total American, is the TH sound. Mother, father. You know, the Germans want to say mother, father, or they'll say 30 instead of 30. But anyway, I worked on that so I wouldn't sound like a foreigner. We became naturalized citizens in 1968. And so my oldest brother became naturalized a little earlier because he was looking for a job and he had to be an American citizen, and we were not. So in 68, it's usually easier when the whole family becomes naturalized in lieu of just the parents. They don't ask the parents as many questions and all of that. So we all decided in 1968 to become naturalized. We never had a lot of money. My dad was a carpenter over here. So I started, early, odd jobs. So one of the first things which led to, some success later on, one of the jobs I had was at a Dairy Queen. And I used to pick up the lot at the Dairy Queen. They wouldn't have to pay me. They just pick up the lot. If it was really dirty, I got a banana split or something. But anyway, but then that led to later on. And the guy said, "Well, do you want to caddy and shag for me?" He was a golfer. I said, "Be happy to do that." Well, then I started working for him later on. I ended up flipping burgers. That was a Dairy Queen brazier at that time. Then pretty soon I learned to run the machines. And then pretty soon, my background's business and economics. So I started keeping the books for the guy. Then I started doing the hiring, the firing, and pretty soon I was running the place for the guy. So I worked at the Dairy Queen, worked my way through college, worked almost full time while I was taking 16 hours, but it was a good job, and it was a good education for me. When I graduated from college, he said, "I'll offer you any salary, and later on, I'll sell the Dairy Queens to you." So my wife and I, thought, is that something we want to do? I was on my feet, sometimes 10, 12 hours a day. Thought, you know what, I should do something different. Had a job offer from Standard Oil. I thought, you know what, I'm going to go to work for one of the biggest oil companies in the world. So I got a job as a systems analyst. I used to do profit index analysis to build a service station here or there, and how much can you generate and all that. So anyway, I worked for them, climbing the corporate ladder, and I wasn't sure whether that's what I really wanted to do. So my brother, Carl, he graduated about the same time that I did, and so it just took him a little longer. He was working for a building contractor in Minneapolis. He said, "Pete, why don't you quit your job and let's start a construction company?" I said, "I don't know anything about construction." He said, "You're good at marketing and sales." So we put together a 5-year plan, and we figured we needed X number of dollars, and we didn't have X number of dollars. So my parents then co-signed for my brother, and my mother-in-law co-signed for me. We still didn't have enough money. So we decided, maybe we should sell stock. So we did. We sold stock. So 2/7 of our company was actually outsiders that invested in our company. So this was 1972. So then, excuse me, I'm going to take a drink here. So in 1972, then we were looking at Rochester and Owatonna and Mankato, and we decided to move. We decided to open an office here in Rochester. Didn't know anybody. Had to get a hold of an attorney, and some of you might know Sandy Keith.
Oh, sure.
Okay, so Sandy Keith was our friend, and was our first attorney. C.O. Brown Agency was the insurance company, and Marquette Bank, the Polat Bank, at that time, was a bank. So we ended up settling in Rochester, 117 North Broadway, right next door to the Armory, downtown. And then 75, we put an office in Mankato. 75, we had a warehouse in Waseca. And then, let's see, in 1979, we thought we should have our own office and warehouse. So we looked all around Rochester, north and south side of town. And we spotted this area that was a cornfield on Highway 52 and 63. So the southeast quadrant of the intersection where Menards is, there were 75 acres there. And some of the people thought, that place floods, why would you even want that? Well, we were in the building business, so we did a survey and we found that the eastern part, 10 acres, was in the floodplain. So you could not build, you can't build on a floodplain. But it had 50 feet of sand under it. So we started to mine that, and that's what we did then, to put streets and sewer and water in there. So my brother and I developed then the 75 acres, which is Whistle Binkies is out there and some of that. So that's how we ended up then. Then we started selling property as well as buildings. So that was really a good deal for us. So we've been out there. We built the first building out there, and we've got 30 businesses out there right now. So we're a design build firm. So we do architectural and engineering and construction. And we build about 100 projects a year. So some of them are small remodel jobs, and some of them are fairly good size buildings. So a couple of the notables in town, we built like the Honda dealership and the West Bank out there, Pepsi Cola, Federal Express, and then most of what is in Woodlake Park. So we've been real fortunate over the years to be able to do that. So we've built at least 2,000 projects in the last 50-some years. And it's ironic, we build a lot of manufacturing plants as well as churches, and they're completely opposite. So one of the reasons that we build a lot of churches, when we work for a nonprofit, we usually work for a lower margin. So we built at least one church every single year. We just finished Midwest Bible and Resurrection Lutheran, 2 of them here in town. So Salem Road Covenant down the street here a few years ago. So anyway, and some of the bigger projects are like Myricon in Owatonna. We've built 1.5 million square feet for those guys. We do all the work for McNeil Steel, and so we've been real fortunate with that. So in terms of even paying back society, my brother and I decided, or we were looking at, what do we do with our company when both of us want to retire? So my brother retired earlier. He retired in 2000. So I've been running the company for the last 26 years with the help of some good managers. So what we decided to do is to make it an ESOP. That's an employee stock ownership company. So when my brother retired, I gave his half of the company to the employees. So when I retire this year, I'm going to do the same thing. The rest of the stock's going to go to the employees. It's going to become 100% ESOP employee stock ownership company. So we probably have one of the most dedicated and loyal workforces, because everybody owns part of it. When we first started that, I tell the people, even with our trucks, if you smash it up, it's half yours. It's not just all mine. So they've taken better care of everything. And I said, if we have callbacks, it's on you. It's not just on me. So that's worked out really well. And been really fortunate. We have some really loyal people. Actually have one individual who's the third generation working for us. His grandfather we hired as one of the first employees, and then his father, and now him, and all of them were construction superintendents. So they've worked their way up. We obviously we have in our office in Rochester. Obviously we have a management group there, and we have on-staff architects, designers, and we have 7 construction superintendents and the crews that go along with that. So right now, you may have seen the Graham Arena going up. We partner with Krause Anderson, so our crews are doing the big superstructure on that. So about 90% of our work then is done on a design build basis. We do very little bidding, and most of our work, or much of our work, is actually the repeat business. So we've been really lucky, and like I said, somebody's always been looking out for me, my family, and we're real fortunate to be able to be here. It's fortunate for me to be here tonight. Just live a couple of miles down the road here, and my dad obviously was, a barrel maker. So I think Val, if you guys want some tools, I have some tools yet in my garage that I'm willing to, give to the group here. We can just make some time, come out there, and you can add it to the collection there. You've got one piece that looks fairly like I have at home, but we've got knives and, and all the things that a cooper might use. Some old saws yet, so anyway, with that, I'll open it up to questions. Yes?
Mr. Schuller. We're in 2026. What can we learn today from your assimilation as an immigrant all those years ago?
Well, see, of course, the immigration thing is such, it's on the forefront right now. And, and I don't have any problem saying, if somebody's been over here for 10 years and they made a living, and all of that, we ought to give them the ability, to get a license and whatever and stay here, okay? I think it's really pretty hard, with all the immigrants coming. They don't have a birth certificate. Some are, lost and all that. So what do we do, with that? And how do we really handle that? And do we have the capability as a country to be able to do that? But that's been the biggest issue right now, is that how do we assimilate that, and how do we get them to be able to prove that? We were lucky in that, we had a valid birth certificate, and it was pretty strict. I mean, even then. But if you have to leave a country to come to this country because of whatever, you don't even have time to gather that stuff, So what do we do? But I think that sometimes some of us have forgotten what the immigrants have brought to this country, And I think there's a certain work ethic. At least it was for me. It was one of those. When I was young, I thought, what? I want to prove that I'm just as good as anybody over here. So I probably worked a little harder in school. I was probably a little more competitive in sports. So I think with that, and today, it's a real struggle. And I really don't have an answer either, other than, if somebody's been over here, like I said earlier, how do we assimilate them? Okay. Secondly, if they don't have a birth certificate or whatever, what do we do in order to accomplish that? And I think we all need to work, toward that, and like I said, immigrants, all of us are immigrants of some sort, just depend on whether it's this year or, or 100 years ago. And so with that, I don't know what else we can do, but work toward, that the ultimate goal that I think that we need to achieve.
How long did you live with your host family, and how was it for your parents to let you go?
That's an interesting question. So I stayed there for 3 months, and then, they were so good to me. I had a savings account, because then, I started working around town too, and of course I was the German kid, so I could do this and that. My brother Jürgen, the guy that was born in Budapest, he lived across the fjord from me, so he got to go too. Only he lived with quite a wealthy family, and he didn't perhaps get the opportunity that I had with my host family. But even there, I got to know the bus driver, and at that time, this was a 20-kilometer trek from where he lived across the fjord from where we lived. So I got to be friends with the bus driver. So I said, hey, and those bus drivers at that time, they had to drop off packages as well as mail, as well as passengers. I said, I'll make a deal with you. I said, I'll drop off all those packages. You don't even have to get out of your seat, driver's seat. So that's what I did. So whenever I wanted to go visit my brother, I ended up over there. And your question was?
About 3 months, and then
Yeah.
How did your mom think about, was she scared that you were going?
Well, here's what happened then, is that they had hoped I would come back the next year again. And so they already had made provisions, I had a savings account and all that over there already. So they said, obviously they asked my parents, could I come back? Well, we were right in the middle of coming over here. So my parents said, well, really no. So they made my parents an offer. What if we adopted him? So I'm not sure. From one side, obviously that would have been really nice, to go into a nice family. But no, that didn't happen. So then we did then correspond, with them, and it continued. So kept in touch. And, I was fortunate enough. So when my parents were alive, so half of our relatives, and this is one of those things for immigration. So people from Europe at that time, they were either going to Canada, Australia, or the United States. And so I had a cousin that ended up in Australia, and the majority of them stayed either in Austria or in Germany. And so we still had relatives in Germany. So when my parents were alive, number one is they retired then from Sioux Falls, and they moved to Stewartville. We wanted them to live closer, and with medical issues that could arise later on. So my parents ended up moving to Stewartville. So anyway, we ended. See, I lost my train. We used to go back with my parents. So every 3 years, I would take my parents back to visit our relatives, and it was really kind of interesting. The first time we went back, the Germans have this joke. If you're trilingual, you know 3 languages. If you're bilingual, you know 2 languages. And if you only know 1 language, you're an American.
Oh, that's true.
I didn't care for that at all. So when we came back, then I thought, you know what? I'm going to study German again. I started then writing to my aunts and uncles in German. And by the way, I did take German in high school. It was an easy A. And then in college, I took a couple of German courses, but they were upper courses. And of course, you got to remember, I was only in 4th grade, so my vocabulary was not a high school or a college vocabulary. It was, it was a 4th grader. So then I had to obviously pick that up. But it's interesting. So when you move from another country to here, or to any other country, at first you translate. In other words, you think in German, and then you translate it into English. And then after a while, when you're over here for a while, you when you speak English, you start to think in English, and when you speak in German, you start to think in German. Then after you're here for a while, then I think in English, and then translate it into German when I speak German. But when I went back, and the number of times that I've been back, then I can be there for a week, and I will think in German, and I will speak in German. And when I'm here, I'll speak, And we had some friends from Austria that were visiting some time ago, and we went out for dinner. We started telling jokes. Now, the Austrians could not speak English, and the guests that we had could not speak German. So I was going back and forth. It was interesting, how you can translate back and forth. So anyway,
Thank you.
so anything else?
What language do you dream in?
Pardon me?
What language do you dream in?
Dreaming? I'm not sure if it's I have a dream, whether it's English or German. I do, like I said, sometimes now a word will come back to me in German before it does in English, which is as I've gotten older. And that has just happened the last few years.
Do you remember what foods you ate when you were in the camp?
In the can? Yeah, it's we were lucky to even get an egg, a boiled egg. I remember having an egg, and we'd cut it into 5 pieces, so each one of us would get something. The other thing, we're fortunate enough to receive care packages from the U.S. So we'd get butter, in big cans. So every once in a while we'd do that. And I remember Spam.
Yeah.
And then, we would share this with some of the other people that lived in the barracks there. And it was interesting. One of the couple that lived in the barracks, they came to visit us here in the United States a number of years ago. And you know what they wanted? Spam. So we had to go get Spam. And that's what we had to, And it's really kind of interesting because my wife and I are vegetarians.
Oh, okay.
So anyway, but obviously, at that time we still ended up doing it. But that's what they remember then. And then we had a lot of, I remember eating a lot of bread. And we'd either put garlic on it or cut onions and put on it, It's cheap. Heating then, we were somewhat industrious. There was a flax factory not far from where we live, and my father happened to work at that flax factory, making about 25 cents an hour back in '56. And every once in a while, coal would drop off from one of the trucks, and we'd pick that stuff up, and we'd take it home, and we'd use it for heating then. And then we had a river that was not far, so we used to go down there. We bathed down there because we had no running water and an outside fountain. You're lucky if it didn't freeze, in the wintertime. And I think they had like 3 or 4, and there were 8 families living in this army barracks. Had a fence around it. So at that time, the Austria, Stoppel, where we lived, was predominantly Catholic. So Protestants there were only 3 Protestants in my class. So when they had catechism and all that, we got to leave. So we went out behind there, and there was a hill there, and we used to go sledding, you know, while they were having their sessions. But so maybe that was an advantage, I don't know. But anyway, but what happened then is the education system. So I went to, you go to 2 years of kindergarten there. So I ended up then going to this kindergarten for 2 years, and it was really nice. There, you know, had some great nuns there, and so you learn, you know, some of that. And then in grade school, and they have a system over there, an educational system. Number one is they have a great vocational system, far better than, you know, what we have here. But they almost put you in lanes, okay? So when you're in 4th grade already, you had to determine, which lane do you think you're going to be in, and part of it is obviously your intelligence or what you want to do. So in 4th grade, you either go on to, to school, or you get into the university lane or into the vocational lane. So my oldest brother, Carl, he was already a cabinet maker over there, or he was apprentice cabinet maker. And I'm not sure which lane I would have ended up in, but we moved before that, so that was never the case. But that's what they do, and I think that the people, when they are in that, they are well educated in whatever field, whether it's plumbing, electrician, or whatever. More so, there's a different emphasis than here on that, and we're working toward now, vocational system in lieu of just universities and all that. I think we pay our doctors a little more here than they do in Europe, in Austria, Germany. And the people that make just as much as the doctors are educators. So the educational system over there, they're higher paid than we are here. So they consider the educators on the same level as doctors, if you will, in terms of salary. And they require the education that goes along with that too, and so yeah. So my wife is a deaf and hard of hearing, teacher. Was a teacher in Sioux Falls, South Dakota School for Deaf, and then we moved here. And I can remember, I was making as much money at the Dairy Queen going to college as her first year of pay as a teacher. I thought, there's something wrong with this picture. But anyway, I won't go into that. That's just a whole other thing.
Where did you go to college?
I went to Augustana, Sioux Falls.
Okay.
And, it's really kind of interesting, along with that, somebody else was looking out for me too, my father was a carpenter, and then he was a carpenter for Sioux Valley Milk Producers, and then Land O'Lakes bought him out. My dad got laid off. So, but my dad was a really good musician. My dad played in the Sioux Falls Symphony, and when they moved to Stewartville, he played in the brass band group down there as well. But they were building a co-educational dorm at Augustana College. And my dad knew the professor who was the conductor of the symphony, who headed the music department. He said, Gus, hey, we're building a new co-education dorm. Could you and your wife move in? Mother can be house mother, co-ed dorm, and Gus, you can take care of the building. So anyway, that's what they did. So my parents then worked for Augustana College. Well, lucky for me, I got my tuition free. So anyway, and then of course they had to take me regardless of my grades. But I didn't do too bad. I just didn't study enough, in high school. I went to a large high school, 920 in our graduating class. Our high school was 3,000 people, and I was about 260 out of 920. Wasn't too bad. But anyway, Augustana, good Lutheran school.
Have you been been able to follow any of your ancestry before you ended up in the camps?
My kids have kind of looked at that, but I have not. So no, my dad, and this is another thing too. My dad was totally against guns, okay, because of the war. So I was never allowed to have even a toy gun, And parents really didn't, he didn't talk much about the war at all. Said, I want to forget about it and all of that. So ancestry, my kids have a little, but we really don't know. My father's ancestors were from Luxembourg. And my mother, it seems like she was from the Vienna area. But that's about as far back, and my kids, we have some Irish stuff and all that, all over. But predominantly it was Europe that, my ancestors are from.
What are your plans for retirement?
Plans? Well, I plan to retire this year.
What are you gonna do after you retire?
Well, yeah, so everybody always asks me, I have a million things to do. Number one is I want to go back to school a little bit. I love gardening. I love mowing lawns, my lawn, when I have a chance to do it. And I was never that way, I've gotten into trees. I'm more of a nature person now than I've ever been. And my wife and I were lucky enough to buy a place on Lake Superior.
Where on Lake Superior?
We are north of Grand Marais.
Up the trail?
Yep. Well, we're on Lake Superior. So
You're on Lake Superior.
we're in Hoveland.
Okay.
Okay, so we have 300 feet of lakeshore. We have 400 feet or 4 acres of pine trees. So I plan to spend some time up there, a little more than I have. And then, I have been real active in my church for a long time and plan to continue to do that. I'm on a couple of boards here in town, plan to do that. So, I have a list, not just a honey-do list, but a list of things that I want to do, a little more traveling. My wife and I have gone back to Europe, several times. We'll continue to do that. Yeah, I don't think I'm gonna, bored is not in my vocabulary. So anyway, that's, continue to do that.
Do you have a cabin yet on that land?
Yeah,
Really?
it's a little, yeah.
Describe it just a little bit. Can you hear the waves crashing?
Oh yeah, we do. So it's a 4-bedroom house with a couple of bathrooms and a guest house and all of that along with it. So it's a nice place. Yeah, you can hear the waves. That's another thing too. We're lucky. Our lake shore is stone, so we don't have just the pebbles. They're the flat stone. We can have chairs out there, and then we have these lily ponds there. When the water blows in, there's some lily pads, if you will, within some of that. Yeah, I mean, it's God's country, and we're lucky, I think, to be in Minnesota. I mean, it's one of the things.
Have you been to the art festival at Hovland?
Have.
Very nice.
See, that art festival is about 2 miles from us. So have you been at Nana Boujou? We're 5 miles north of Nana Boujou.
I've stayed there.
Yeah.
And I
So-
learned you don't want a room over the cheap rooms are over the kitchen. You don't want one of those.
Yeah,
They're
she
too
knows.
noisy. They're too noisy. You
Exactly.
You get a better room
Yeah.
without the noise.
That's really kind of interesting. If you have not gone to Nana Boujou, or if you don't know something about it, so number one is that was built in the 1920s, and it was an investment, for baseball players and high income people.
And then the Depression came.
And then the Depression came. Yep. And they ended up losing that whole thing, and then eventually a family ended up buying it, and a family still owns it right
They're
now.
from Rochester.
And they're really, yeah, and I'm not sure, they're getting up there in age, and the kids really don't want to take over, and I'm not sure what's going to happen to them. But it's one of the most gorgeous places, Nana Boujou, and You know, it's a good restaurant, it's a good place, it's a good retreat. A lot of retreats happen there. So anyway, yeah, it's a wonderful, wonderful place. So I don't know, you know, and I consider my story, you know, an American dream. You know, I mean, you moved as an immigrant and done fairly well. And, you know, and part of it is hard work, you know, and I think it's just, you know, I was not a genius, but keeping your nose to the grindstone and just working toward some of the goals that you have, treating other people the way you want to be treated, and taking care of customers the way they ought to be taken care of. And we've, you know, developed that reputation that I tell everybody, construction is not an exact science, but what you do with it, if you have an issue, is really what makes the difference. And we've been pretty fortunate in taking care of, you know, when we do have some issues.
Now, your youth, did you do as far as like sports? And then you said your father was a brass. Did you do music?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. So here's what happens. When we moved over here, you know, our relatives wanted us to bring instruments back, accordions, violins, and all that. Well, in order to do that, you have to be able to play those because they didn't want you to bring them over and then sell them. So what happened then is, yeah, my father was musical, so I started playing the violin in second grade. So one of the instruments we brought over here was a violin, and we landed. Our port of entry was Minneapolis, so we landed in Minneapolis. Okay, they made me take out the violin and play a tune. And WCCO was there. I actually played. I think it was Twinkle Twinkle Little Star or something, you know. But anyway, so then my father then, you know, was a musician, and I think my dad wanted me then to continue in music. And out of our family, there was only one brother that continued in music. I decided, you know, to get into sports. So I was a runner, and I was a decent runner. But my brother Jürgen, the middle brother, it's another thing. He got drafted. He graduated from college. He was a music major in college. Graduated at the height of the Vietnam War, 1967. He got drafted into the Army. And the professor at the college, who got my dad the job there and all that, he said, why don't you apply for why don't you audition for the Air Force Academy band and the Army band? But you got to be good to get in. You know, they're the best in the nation. He auditioned at the Air Force Academy, and they pulled him out of the Army and put him in the Air Force Academy, Colorado Springs. So he ended up spending 4 years in Colorado Springs, marching the cadets to Chow, playing for the presidential inauguration. So he was one of them that pursued music, but I did not. I was in sports.
What did he play?
He played the oboe. Oboe and the English horn. So he used to play, you know, for recitals and weddings and all of that. And I don't know, he made the wrong choice. I think after the academy, he went to Boulder, got his master's there. Then he tried to get into the Denver Symphony. And you just don't get into a symphony. You got to have some either political connections, unfortunately, or whatever. And my brother was not political. You know, I said, hey, why don't you take lessons from one of the first chair oboist, you know, and maybe you can get in. But anyway, didn't do that. So yeah, I'm a storyteller, so I can go on and on.
Peter, I'll probably think of a question later that is relevant, but I just want to thank you so much for your testimony.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing your story and answering questions. And I know a board that's got an empty seat. I'm just gonna throw that out there.
What's that?
So.
Oh.
One more hand for Peter. And, absolutely. thank you for coming. As Chris said, we are nothing without you. So, grab a schedule for, the rest of this month and next month, so you can join us. Next week, we have planning your spring garden for gardeners out there. Next month, we have the Mayo Clinic series, the first Thursday. The third Thursday, for something a little creepier, we have the Estes Snake Farm. The first commercial snake farm in the country was right here in Rochester. So if you like the creepy crawlies, which I don't, I tried to get snakes, Oxbow and Quarry Hill. No one was available to bring their snakes, which so there won't be any snakes. Thank you. Drive safely. Thank you so much for coming. If you didn't get a chance to check out the exhibit, take a few minutes and wander through there. And we'll see you next time. Thank you.